Looking for those of us watching on during the coronation. Some of the details are yet to be released. But is there a moment?
No, I'm waiting to be told.
The palace walls once held the kingdom's deepest secrets, but one moment changed everything. Princess Anne, known for her steady loyalty, spoke words she was never meant to say. With King Charles battling illness in silence, her slip revealed more than the family had planned to share. Suddenly, whispers of Prince William's coronation turned into headlines. The public, unprepared yet curious, clung to every detail of the leak. What was supposed to remain hidden became the center of national attention. Did Anne's truth-telling bring clarity or chaos? And how would it reshape the monarchy's future? The unexpected revelation from Princess Anne. It was a quiet evening, the kind that carried no hint of drama. The chandeliers glowed softly above, music drifted through the hall, and the air was warm with polite laughter. Guests moved with ease, glasses in hand, speaking in low voices. Cameras clicked gently in the background, capturing smiles and simple moments. Everything seemed as it always had, calm and controlled. Princess Anne walked with steady steps, her presence calm and certain. She greeted guests with nods, quick smiles, and her usual short jokes that made people laugh in quiet tones. She had always been known for saying things plainly, never dressing her words in fancy coverings. To see her so at ease was nothing new. And then, in the middle of that ordinary calm, something slipped. It was so quick, so unplanned, yet heavy enough to change the air in the room. Anne leaned toward a small group, her voice firm but casual, and the words came out with no warning. William's coronation should be on the 15th of December. The moment hung there like a bell strike. For a second, no one moved. Some blinked, unsure if they had heard her right. Others smiled politely, thinking perhaps they had misunderstood. But then the silence stretched, pressing down on every corner of the hall. A soft gasp broke the quiet, followed by whispers that scattered like ripples in water. Faces turned, eyes wide with disbelief. Reporters froze, their hands trembling only for a heartbeat before racing to scribble every word. They checked their recorders, their phones, and one by one, they slipped out of the hall to call their editors. The news had wings now. The cameras turned sharply toward Prince William. His face was still, but his eyes gave him away. They flickered with shock, confusion, perhaps even a touch of hurt. He had not expected those words to fall here, in such a casual moment, in front of so many. Across the room, King Charles sat with his head slightly bowed, his face drained of color, his hand trembling as he reached for his glass. But why did Princess Anne, the most careful of them all, let those words escape? The weight of a princess. Anne's word, Princess Anne had always stood apart from the rest of the family. She did not chase the lights of the cameras or linger in the glow of attention. Where others might smile for the world and bask in applause, she chose a different path. Duty was her anchor, and service was her compass. She moved steadily through each day, her eyes fixed not on glamour, but on work. People saw that. They admired her because she asked for nothing and gave everything. They called her the hardest working royal, the one who carried more engagements than anyone else, and she did so without complaint. It was not glory she sought, nor headlines, nor favor. For Anne, the crown was not about herself. It was about the people it served. That was why the shock was so deep. Her words cut through the air not like a careless slip, but like a stone dropped in still water. Anne was not careless. She was precise, steady, and fiercely loyal. She had spent years at Charles's side, sharing in his struggles and holding her silence through storms that might have broken another. No one expected her, of all people, to let such a secret escape. And yet, she did. The nation's whispers grew louder by the hour. Was it truly a mistake? A single moment when truth slipped from her lips before she could stop it? Or had she meant it, her honesty stronger than her silence? Some believed she had wanted the people to know that she had chosen duty to them over duty to secrecy. Inside the palace, the story felt heavier. To Charles, Anne was more than a sister. She was a shield, She had defended him when the world's voices grew harsh and had stood steady when family disagreements rose like storms. William, too, looked to her, trusting her judgment in moments when the path was not clear. She was the one whose counsel carried weight because it came without ambition. And so the question pressed harder. Why now? Some close to her murmured that she had spoken out of urgency. They believed she knew what others did not, that Charles's strength was fading more quickly than the world realized. Perhaps she could not bear the thought of the nation being struck unprepared, caught in grief without warning. Perhaps her heart had decided that truth was the kinder path. But why? Was it love for her brother that pushed her to speak? Or was it a secret too heavy to hold alone? And how did King Charles react to this? The king's secret struggle. It began quietly, without any sign that history was shifting. Charles carried the crown with calm dignity, his hand raised in the same steady wave that had comforted people for decades. Yet, behind the palace walls, another story unfolded. His body no longer carried the strength it once had. He grew thinner, his steps slower, and even the smallest tasks drained the life from him. Those closest to him noticed the changes first. The way his jackets hung looser, the pauses that stretched between his words, the way he leaned on the arm of a chair before rising. None of this was meant for the public eye. Outside, he smiled, greeted the crowds, and carried the weight of kingship as if nothing was wrong. But when the doors closed, the truth became impossible to hide. Doctors came often, speaking in voices that mixed firmness with gentleness. They told him his illness was unforgiving, that he must rest, that treatments and time were not luxuries but necessities. Yet Charles resisted. In his heart, stepping back meant surrendering too soon. Every day on the throne felt like a promise to his people, and he would not let himself break it. But behind the shine of pageantry, there were needles, medicines, and long hours of recovery. His aides became experts in preserving the image of strength. They planned his outings around treatments, arranged lighting to soften the lines of exhaustion, and cut away the moments that might betray weakness. To the nation, their king remained firm. But to those in the inner circle, every smile cost him. Every wave carried weight. In those private hours, it was Anne who stood nearest. She was more than a sister. She was his confidant. He trusted her with the truths he told no one else. She listened without fear, holding his worries as tightly as his hopes. Her steadiness gave him courage when his body betrayed him. Advisors, meanwhile, began their own quiet talks. They spoke not of if, but when. They shaped plans where William would step forward sooner than anyone once expected. Charles knew of these discussions, and though he rarely spoke of it, he accepted that his reign might be shorter than he had imagined. Silence became their strongest defense, and it held, until Anne's slip. In one sentence, the veil was torn. The whispers of illness were replaced by the certainty of truth. Now the question spread everywhere. How long could he hold on before the crown passed to his son? A monarch's image. Under strain, Charles had waited longer than any heir in history to wear the crown. For decades, he stood patiently in the shadow of his mother, Queen Elizabeth. He knew his moment would come, though it would come only with her passing. When that day arrived in September 2022, the world saw a man who had prepared all his life for the role. Many hoped his reign would become a bridge between old traditions and modern times. At first, it felt that way. His speeches were filled with duty and service. He spoke of a monarchy that could hold to its roots while adapting to change. People wanted to believe in him. They saw a leader who had waited, learned, and was ready to step forward. But behind those moments, another story was unfolding. In 2024, Charles was diagnosed with cancer. His schedule was reduced, his calendar lighter. Events that once filled his weeks were trimmed, and his public appearances grew fewer. The changes were subtle at first. Speeches grew shorter, his steps slower. To the public, it was explained carefully by the palace as caution, as the pacing of a new king. But photographs told more than the words. His frame looked slimmer, his face paler under the lights, his shoulders less firm. Those who followed him closely could not ignore it, and concern quietly began to grow. Even so, many admired him more. They praised his courage for continuing duties when it was clear his health was fragile. Every wave of his hand, every appearance felt like proof of his resolve. But with sympathy came uncertainty. Whispers rose, asking whether he could carry the crown for long. Would illness shorten a reign that had only just begun? The questions deepened when Princess Anne, during an unguarded moment, mentioned William's coronation. It was only a few words, yet they carried weight. What had once been private speculation spilled into the open. The doubts surrounding Charles's health suddenly felt more real, more immediate, and harder to deny. Now, with Charles's illness and his sister's words in the open, that certainty seemed broken. And the question that lingered was no longer hidden. If his reign was shorter than expected, was the nation ready for what would follow? Plans for a new era. Far from the cameras, behind the tall gates of Buckingham Palace, another story unfolded. Around polished tables, advisors gathered in hushed voices. Papers covered in dates and lists lay spread out before them. The air in the room was thick with secrets too heavy for the outside world to hear. Charles was still alive, but these men and women were already planning what would happen when he was gone. No one said the word final. Instead, they called them tentative dates, possible moments. Yet the marks on the calendar carried more than ink. They carried the weight of the future. Those quiet numbers would decide when William would step forward, when the next crown would be placed on his head. It was not a dream or a distant plan anymore. It was real, and it was waiting. Discussions turned to the great halls and cathedrals. Which would hold the sacred moment? Westminster Abbey, as tradition demanded, stood at the heart of the talks. The crown itself, St. Edward's crown, ancient and heavy with history, would be part of the day. Yet whispers filled the room about adding new touches. Perhaps the service could carry a more modern light, a way of saying this was not only about the past, but also the future. Security was a word repeated often. Thousands would flood the streets, they said. Leaders from across the world would arrive. Every step, every hand raised, every movement of the new king would need protection. They spoke of invitations, of names written on endless lists, of seating charts that balanced rank and power. They spoke of the order of service, of the music, of the symbols that would define a reign not yet begun. Every detail mattered, because this was more than a ceremony. It was the first memory of a new king. The image of William's beginning would stay with the nation forever. But all of it was supposed to remain hidden. The public was not meant to know until the right time. Silence was part of the plan. Control was part of the process. The palace held its secrets close, guarding them like treasures. And then Anne spoke. Her words were not planned, not rehearsed, but they cut through the months of secrecy like a knife. In a single sentence, the quiet work of countless meetings spilled into the open. The dates, the plans, the future, it was all suddenly real in the ears of the people. Outside the palace, the world lit up. In streets, in cafes, on screens, people asked questions that could not be silenced. Was the king so ill that his son's reign was already near? Was the transition closer than anyone had admitted? Inside the gates, tension boiled. Deny it? Delay it? Admit it? Every choice carried danger. Every path was filled with risk. The monarchy had planned for a new era, but not like this. Not under the glare of eyes watching, waiting, and wondering what the truth really was. The secret had become a storm, and now the monarchy was forced to step forward into a future they had not yet chosen. But what was Prince William's reaction to this? Let's find out. William's silent burden. William's path was written before he even understood what it meant. From the moment of his birth, the crown had been his destiny, a future waiting for him like a shadow he could never escape. Teachers, mentors, and family reminded him of duty, of responsibility, of the day he would one day step into his father's shoes. Yet deep inside, he had always hoped that the future would wait, giving him the years to live as a son before becoming a sovereign. But Anne's words changed everything. Overnight, William was thrust into a new light. No longer was he only the Prince of Wales. The world now saw him as the next king, a figure preparing to ascend not in a distant future, but possibly within months. The crown had moved closer, its weight pressing against him even before it touched his head. In public, William played his role with perfect calm. His smile was measured, his steps confident, his words careful. To those watching, he seemed ready, steady, even unshaken by the news swirling around the palace. But behind the scenes, the pressure grew heavy. Every morning brought new whispers. Every evening ended with discussions of what was to come. He carried more than duty. He carried family. His children, still young and innocent, had no idea what it meant for their father to be king. He wanted them to grow freely, untouched by the demands of the crown, but the world was already watching them. Every outing, every photograph, every moment became part of a narrative they could not yet comprehend. Advisors came often, papers in hand, voices calm but firm. They spoke of ceremonies, of oaths, of plans that now centered on him. They reminded him that the nation would look to him for stability, for strength, for hope when his father could no longer give it. William nodded, listened, and agreed, but inside, his heart ached. He was still a son, watching his father fade, but the world would not allow him to grieve as one. Every word he spoke was studied, every gesture measured against the image of a king. Was he ready? Was he strong enough? Could he lead? His refusal to answer these questions in public only fueled more speculation. His silence became both shield and burden. It protected him, but it also made the whispers grow louder. William knew he could not show weakness. His calm presence had become his greatest defense. Yet deep within, he wrestled with truths too heavy to admit. His father was dying, and he was being asked to prepare for the very role he had hoped would wait. He was not only inheriting a crown, but also the sorrow of a nation losing its king. The burden was more than history, more than tradition. It was the shadow of Charles, a man who had waited his entire life for the throne, only to have his reign cut short by illness. William would inherit not just the throne but the unfinished legacy of his father. It was a heavy inheritance, marked by sadness as much as duty. But while William carried this silent burden, there was another figure in the palace whose fears ran just as deep. What did Camilla see when she looked at the future? And how did Anne's words reopen the wounds she had fought so long to heal? Queen Camilla's hidden fears. The corridors of Clarence House were quiet, but Camilla's mind was restless. She lay awake in the dark, her thoughts circling the same questions again and again. After decades of struggle, she had finally been accepted as queen. For years, she endured whispers, criticism, and endless comparisons to Diana. Slowly, through patience and loyalty, she had won over much of the public. Crowds cheered when she appeared, newspapers praised her service, and for the first time in her life, she felt secure in her role. But Anne's words shattered that fragile peace. With one slip, the world began talking not of Charles and Camilla, but of William and the future. The attention shifted, and once again, she felt pushed to the edge. Camilla had always known her crown was unlike others before her. She had not entered the monarchy young, nor had she taken the title in a moment of strength. Instead, she arrived late, as Charles's lifelong companion finally received recognition. Her reign was tied completely to his. Without Charles, she feared, her place would vanish as quickly as it had come. The thought haunted her. Would she remain visible when William became king, or would she fade quietly into the background? The public might smile at her now, but would they remember her kindly tomorrow? Or would history write her off as a queen of transition, a name forgotten when the new reign began? Her past rose in her mind, sharp and unwelcome. She could still hear the protests, see the newspaper headlines filled with anger, and remember the shouts from the crowd when she first appeared beside Charles. She had been cast as the outsider, the rival, the woman who did not belong. For years, she endured that storm, trusting that time would soften hearts, and slowly it had. But Anne's slip reopened those wounds, reminding her that acceptance was not permanent. It was fragile. Charles tried to soothe her. In the quiet of their rooms, he reached for her hand, told her she had proven her worth, and insisted that the people respected her now. She wanted to believe him. Yet when she looked at him, his tired face, his weakening body, she felt the truth. He could not shield her from what was coming. With every new headline, the monarchy's foundations trembled. How would the public respond as Charles's final days grew closer, and could the crown survive another change so soon? Public shock and speculation. Morning came, and with it, a storm of voices across Britain. The slip from Anne had spread like fire in dry fields, moving from whispers in the hall to the headlines of every paper. In the streets, in markets, in classrooms, people spoke of little else. Some voices were gentle. They spoke of Charles with sympathy, saying he deserved his peace, that his final years should not be troubled by rumors or debates. They remembered how long he had waited, how patiently he had served, and how unfair it seemed that illness was cutting his reign short. These people wanted silence, not scandal. They wished the nation would grant him dignity. Others felt differently. They praised Anne, saying her honesty had done what the palace refused to do. The people, they argued, had the right to know. If a new king was to come soon, why should the truth be hidden? They called her brave, even if her words had slipped out by mistake. The newspapers wasted no time. Bold headlines filled the stands. Accidental coronation leak screamed across front pages. Pictures of William's startled face were shown beside Charles's pale expression. Anne stood in the center, calm but unyielding. Her words now a turning point in history. On television, debate raged. Morning shows gathered panels of experts, historians, and commentators. Some argued the monarchy had a duty to be more open. Others said secrecy was tradition, and tradition was the heart of the crown itself. The conversations grew heated, but they all circled the same point. The monarchy was shaken, and the people could feel it. Social media, faster than any newspaper, made the slip a spectacle. Short clips of Anne's words were shared thousands of times. Hashtags trended, memes appeared, and arguments filled every corner. Some accused the palace of hiding too much. Others spun wild theories about why Anne had spoken. A few even believed it had been deliberate, a gentle way to prepare the nation for what was coming. For the first time in years, the monarchy stood not only in ceremony but in the center of raw public debate. But actually, was this an accident or was it deliberate? Was it truly a mistake? Whispers filled the corridors of both palace and press rooms. Anne's words, spoken with the kind of directness she had always been known for, had set off a storm. She had let slip something that was never meant to be shared in public, and now the question hung heavy in the air. Was it truly an accident, or had it been done with intention? Royal watchers pored over every detail of her statement. Each pause, each expression, and even the tone of her voice were replayed again and again on screens across the nation. Analysts studied her history, pointing out how Anne had built a reputation for being outspoken, sometimes even blunt, in a family where silence was often the chosen weapon. That history made some believe she had spoken with full knowledge of the effect it would create. To them, she was preparing the nation, softening the blow of what was already inevitable. But others argued that Anne was not a schemer. They said her words were an accident, spoken in a moment of warmth, never meant to shake the monarchy's carefully built walls. In their eyes, it was the press that had magnified a small slip into a national spectacle. Yet the timing was too perfect, they admitted. The king's health was fragile, the public already worried, and William's steady presence as heir had been growing more visible. Could such a moment truly have been a chance? Inside the palace, speculation ran just as fiercely. Some aides whispered that Anne had grown tired of secrecy. Watching her brother fade while the nation remained in the dark had weighed heavily on her. She had always been loyal to him, but perhaps her loyalty to the crown, to duty itself, had grown stronger. In her eyes, maybe the people deserved honesty more than they needed comforting illusions. Still, others insisted there was no way Anne would deliberately hurt Charles. Their bond had been unshakable for decades. She had stood by him through storms, and he trusted her deeply. For those closest to them, the idea that she would betray him with calculated words was unthinkable. But duty had its own demands, And if duty pressed harder than love, then perhaps the truth had slipped not by accident, but by necessity. Across Britain, theories swirled. Some believed Anne had been thinking not of herself, but of William. She had seen the weight pressing down on his shoulders, the way he carried his burden quietly yet heavily. Perhaps, they said, she wanted to ease his path, to prepare the public so the shock of succession would not break him when the time came. The palace, however, gave nothing away. Spokesmen refused to clarify, speaking only in vague phrases about respect for the king and the importance of unity. Their silence only deepened the mystery. Was the family divided over her words? Or were they, too, unsure of what her true intention had been? In living rooms, cafes, and offices, the debate never stopped. Was it an honest mistake, a slip of the tongue, or was it a deliberate act, veiled in the softness of family conversation, but weighted with the power of destiny? The answer was never given. The dawn of a new crown. Time moved quietly, but Charles's health moved with it. Each passing day brought signs that the transition could no longer be held back. What had once been distant planning now became an urgent reality. Behind closed doors, the preparations that had long been whispered about began to quicken. The weight of history pressed against the palace walls, calling for the next chapter to begin. William found himself drawn deeper into meetings that stretched into long evenings. Advisors who had once spoken to him occasionally now met him regularly, guiding him through matters of state, ceremony, and the countless details that shaped a king's reign. He entered these rooms with quiet resolve, not seeking the role but unable to deny its approach. In each discussion, his composure never wavered, but those who knew him saw the gravity in his eyes. The nation, too, felt the shift. Newspapers began printing stories of gentle farewells, describing Charles as a man whose service had been steady but whose strength now faded. The people prepared themselves, torn between sorrow for the king they were losing and curiosity about the king who would rise. Every street, every home seemed to carry the same question. What would this new reign mean? Camilla faced her own struggle as the days grew shorter. Acceptance had not come easily for her, but she had finally earned her place at Charles' side as queen. Now she feared the ground beneath her feet was slipping. Without Charles, her position seemed uncertain. Would history remember her as a partner to a king, or simply as a figure who stood in the gap between two reigns? These thoughts haunted her, even as she put on a steady face in public. In private, she leaned on Charles, though he too was weary. Anne remained constant. She divided her time between her brother and her nephew, standing as a bridge between fading duty and new responsibility. Her presence gave stability, even as her earlier words lingered in the minds of the people. To some, she had broken secrecy. To others, she had prepared them. Either way, she remained loyal, carrying both the role of sister and of princess with the same firm hand. The monarchy itself stood at a crossroads. The old order, with Charles at its center, was slowly closing. The new order, with William waiting in its shadow, began to take form. Plans for the coronation grew more urgent. Invitations were drafted, security strengthened, and the symbolic elements that marked the start of a reign were chosen carefully. Tradition would guide much, but modern touches would also find their place, a reflection of William's vision for a new era. The public waited, their emotions caught between mourning and anticipation. The crown was secure, but it was also changing. Britain's identity, tied so deeply to its monarch, was preparing to turn a page that would not be turned back.